Ready? Willkommen, Chappelle! Ich freue mich, mit Ihnen über die Vereinigung Deutschland zu sprechen. Ha! No, I'm not going to do the entire thing in German, I promise. And if you're lucky, you'll get to see a bunch of these bloopers of us trying to pull off that catch for the last, 5 minutes for the intro to this entire thing. But anyway, what I just said in German was that welcome, Chappelle. I'm super excited, or I didn't say super, but I'm very excited to talk to you about the unification of Germany. All right, so what we're getting into now, we don't want this flip to be crazy, crazy long, so we're going to start moving. We're going to move, we're going to go, we're going to move. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it, though. Where we left off, we were kind of talking about the revolutions of 1848 and how the socialists and the liberals were supposed to come together and unite in their efforts and try to get all their little demands accomplished, like more government participation, more constitutional rights and natural liberties and things like that. And so they threw a bunch of barricades up in the streets, and then they got most of their demands accomplished, actually, early on. They got some constitutions laid out, but then when they started fighting with each other, the conservatives saw it as a time to jump them. But the biggest enduring thing that occurred, the enduring thing that lasted through the revolutions of 1848 was the ideas of nationalism spread, okay? So going forward, the unification of Germany, right? So we are now getting into this concept of nationalism, the idea of strong, romantic feelings of a culture or a people having a genius, quote unquote, about them, right? So the ideas of this ism, the ideas of nationalism are going to be the thing that creates what you understand as modern day Germany or Deutschland, all right? Deutschland, if you're actually talking about like the German states, okay? So now, going forward though, remember the Middle Ages? Good times, right, guys? So, big thing to understand before we go anywhere further. You have to understand that German people and German-speaking people have existed for thousands of years. They were around since the Romans. They hail from originally people known as the Saxons, as well as other Germanic tribes of Europe, the Angles, the Huns, the Magyars are also Hungarian, so that's a little bit different. The Franks can sometimes be considered Germanic, but Goths, Visigoths, all Germanic peoples, right? So German-descended or German-speaking people, though, have lived in a variety of different areas throughout Europe, but the big ones are the ones in Central Europe. Now, originally during the Middle Ages, the central area where German-speaking people lived was known as the Holy Roman Empire, as we've already talked about multiple different times. But before Napoleon ever showed up, this thing was this gigantic mashup of states. It's like this old holdout from the Middle Ages. Most of the people that lived there spoke German. Martin Luther being a great example of a person that was from this area of Germany. Back in the day when Charles V was one of the original emperors that controlled this entire area, he used to say a really messed up thing that the only time he ever spoke German was to his horse because he would prefer to speak Spanish or Italian. Now, going into it though, this right here is modern day Germany. And this is the Holy Roman Empire at its height, at its absolute peak, under Charlemagne around 800 AD. So after this whole thing continues to progress forward, it actually only ends up encompassing most of Germany, the Czech Republic modern day, Austria, and a couple of other areas. But now, when Napoleon shows up, you have to understand that ever since the 16th, or what, well, wait, back up, let's back up real quick. So, let me make myself small, there we go. Now, around the 1600s, though, okay, around the 1600s, most German-speaking people still lived in the Holy Roman Empire. But two really, really strong states had emerged in the Holy Roman Empire as guiding lights and forces of German-speaking people. And they happened to be Austria, which was led by the Habsburg family, as we all know. And what was that? Sorry. Okay. Austria, led by the Habsburg family. And then there was this other state that we haven't really got into yet. It was known as Prussia-Brandenburg. And it was led by a family known as the Hohenzollerns, all right? So the Hohenzollerns. Now, the Hohenzollerns had controlled Germany for several hundred years. Some of their first and earliest leaders being Frederick the Great, Frederick the Soldier King, Frederick the Enlightened One, Frederick the Great Elector, a lot of Fredericks, all right? So going forward, though, you got to understand, we're not talking about Russia. We're talking about Prussia. Not Russia, Prussia. There are a lot of different theories as to why the word Prussia and Russia are so dangerously close together, but no conclusive evidence has ever come to the fact that they actually are even necessarily related. But anyway, going on to it, this big area in blue is what I'm talking about, all right? So if you look down here below the blue area, okay, this is Prussia, okay, Prussia. Below the blue area down here is where Austria would have been. Russia is over to the east. Prussia, though, emerged as a massive power coming off the back end of the French Revolution. But the thing about it was, Prussia-Brandenburg was still only just a kingdom/dominant state, but they didn't actually control and or call themselves home to all German-speaking people in the entirety of Europe, because most of the German-speaking people in Europe lived in these ununified areas, places like Schleswig and Holstein, which we will talk about later. But going into it, you got to understand that who comes in, though, and changes everything? Who ruins everything? Of course, Napoleon. So Napoleon Bonaparte invaded the lands that you know of as Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, in 1803, from the period of about 1803, but I think he invaded the Holy Roman Empire specifically around, Rufia, stop licking. He invaded the Holy Roman Empire around 1806. Now, during this whole process, he was waging what he called his Napoleonic Wars, or his Wars of the Coalitions, or Wars against the Coalitions. Now, when Napoleon was doing this, when he was trying to wage all these wars, what he was really going for was one giant unified Europe, with French culture being the leader of it. So he takes over everything in blue. Everything in blue, all of this stuff, and even the purplish color, periwinkle kind of color stuff right here, are still areas that he controlled. They were called sister or puppet republics. Now, he even, when he came in, destroys the Holy Roman Empire completely. And from 1806 to about 1815, people who spoke German lived in either Austria, Prussia, or this area, known as the Confederation of the Rhine. All right, so when the Holy Roman Empire was officially destroyed by Napoleon, it was turned into what was known as the Confederation of the Rhine. You'll need to know that, okay? Also, though, while Napoleon was there for several years, that's where these ideas of nationalism really truly begin to grow. Because Germans do not see themselves as particularly like anyone else in all of Europe. Germans have what you would call a genius all their own. They have their own culture, their own heritage, songs, foods, drinks, everything, language, right? Sprechen Sie Deutsch. They have all their own things that are very, very personal to them. But when Napoleon was taking over, he was pushing French heritage and culture. And this was not what they were about. So these ideas of nationalism are beginning to grow throughout all these German-speaking areas. Well, as we all remember, in about 1815, Napoleon gets exiled finally after his, or 1812, he gets exiled after his Russian invasion. He comes back, and then in 1815, after the Battle of, he is going to be exiled permanently off the island of to the island of St. Helena off the coast of Africa, okay? Now, after he is exiled, they hold what's known as the Congress of Vienna. And at the Congress of Vienna, they decide that they are going to try and consolidate some of these German-speaking areas. Because the issue was, there was this giant area, in the middle of Europe that used to be the Holy Roman Empire, and now it's been turned into the Confederation of the Rhine. Well, the issue that the Congress of Vienna had to deal with was the fact that you couldn't just give control of all these other German-speaking people over to Prussia or over to Austria, because it would have thrown off the balance of power in Europe. Because the Congress of Vienna was all about that balance of power, balancing those scales out. Like, y'all did such a good job looking at that political cartoon of. That political cartoon that was up there of all the countries walking away with other countries and stuff, almost, I think it was something like 95% of y'all realized that that political cartoon was about the Congress of Vienna. And the Congress of Vienna discussed creating a unified German state after they split up what Napoleon had conquered. But the problem was, you can't necessarily make a Germany because it'll make Prussia or Austria too strong, and it'll throw off that balance of power. So what's going to be formed instead? No longer the Confederation of the Rhine like it was under Napoleon. Now they're going to call it the German Confederation. and they're going to take 90 different principalities that existed inside of Europe, and they're going to cook it all down to just 38. Okay, just 38 of them. And in that little map that I just scrolled away from, that we'll get back to in a little bit, yeah, 38. So look at this bad boy right here. So this is the German Confederation post-Congress of Vienna. So as you can see, all the little white lines denoting different areas, those are other German states. It turned them into 38 little independent states led by their own independent governments. And as you can see, inside the German Confederation, you have this big chunk and this area. Well, those are the two powers that the Congress of Vienna didn't want one to be stronger than the other. And what they are is Prussia, again, right here, and Austria, right here. Because just so you know, Austrians speak German. Just a quick heads up, I have been to Austria, and if you ever get a chance, it is home to some of the best and nicest people that you will ever meet in your entire life. You should definitely go if you ever get a chance. But they are not nearly this big now. Austria now only is a country that takes up about yay big of an area. It's it's much smaller now. This is when they were under the Austrian Habsburg Empire. So, Prussia is dedicated to this idea of growing German culture, but they had to figure out a way to do it without necessarily bringing Austria into their business. So then one day, a man finally steps up, and his name is Otto von Bismarck. And Otto von Bismarck, yes, the capital of North Dakota is named after him, or Bismarck, North Dakota. Fast forward, though, to the revolutions of 1848. So the Congress of Vienna has happened, and you took what was the Holy Roman Empire, and then what was the Confederation of the Rhine, and then what is now the German Confederation. And in 1848, I have a hair stuck to me, and it's driving me insane. Did I get it? All right, anyway. So, fast forward to the revolutions of 1848, right? And in 1848, of course, we had all those revolutions breaking out all over Europe, absolutely everywhere. One popped up here, one popped up there, one popped up in Vienna, one popped up inside of Prussia, one popped up, there were 17 of them that broke out all over Europe. Well, during this entire movement, what a lot of people realize is that Germans are necessarily not just calling for equality, but a lot of them are calling for a German-based culture. They're calling for German people to unite together to have their demands met. And so a politician by the name of Otto von Bismarck, who is the chancellor of Germany at the time, decides that now is the time to unite the German states together, with Prussia being the one that does it, not Austria. And why does he want to do this? Because he felt like it. Because you have to understand, Otto von Bismarck saw an opportunity after the revolutions of 1848 with how chaotically broken Europe was, that he could now create not just Prussia, Austria, and a German confederation. No. He wanted to create what was known as a German empire, all right? The German Empire. So, going forward, though, Otto von Bismarck, one of my absolute favorite historical figures of all time. I definitely think he's up there in the top 20. Maybe not necessarily top 10, but he's definitely a top 20 guy. He comes up with all of these crazy initiatives, and he's also a very heavily debated figure throughout all of history. A lot of people can't decide if they believe that Otto von Bismarck is necessarily a good figure, or if he's necessarily a bad figure, if he's necessarily a genius strategist, or just a really good opportunist. But I still like that whole debate. That's why I kind of really appreciate him. And he's going to decide to unite Germany. And when he decides to do this, he decides that he's going to use 3 specific tactics to get this job done. He wants to take all 38 of those principalities that came out of the Congress of Vienna, and he wants to mush them all together, and he wants to make a nice, big, beautiful country that is only German language, German heritage, German culture, Deutschland, all the way, right? So going forward, Realpolitik is one of the first things that he's going to adopt. Now, this is genius. Now, Realpolitik, and Otto von Bismarck himself, is the best user of this concept. You need to underline this and star it, circle it, highlight it, whatever. It's very important, but it can be very confusing at the same time. What you got to understand is that he's using this idea of politics based on current needs, right? He wants to be practical about this, because for the longest time, the revolutions of 1848 could be considered a romantic reaction to all the stuff going on in Europe, right? You could say theoretically that, the Industrial Revolution was taking its toll and the people were hungry and that, the revolts were being suppressed by conservative governments. And you could say all of these things, but then the revolutions of 1848 were kind of a lot of flair and very dramatic, but they weren't very practical. Because practical would have been more along the lines of the liberals, socialists, and conservatives getting together, and instead of pouting all the time, they would have figured out how to understand and come to terms with each other, okay? So that is what Bismarck was all about. He decides, you know what, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to get the job done, I'm going to get it done realistically, and I'm going to get this done quickly. And so one of the biggest examples of this was his Blut und, there's supposed to be an und right here, U-N-D, und, it's Blut und Eisen. Blut und Eisen is blood and iron. It's a speech that he gave. It's a very famous speech that he gave, too, where he called for authority, military strength, and being practical. Because in this speech, he said that German unification and the questions of the day will not be answered with liberal agenda meetings and documents. They will be settled with blood and iron. Blut und Eisen, right? A very, very intense figure. And he's saying that the way we're going to get this done is by showing our authority and going for it. So he also, his second big tactic outside of, because look, Blut und Eisen is an example of realpolitik, right? That's an example of him using realistic politics. His second tactic was the unconditional support of the Prussian monarch at the time, whose name is, yes, if you're saying it in English, it's William, but if you're saying it in German, it's Wilhelm. Wilhelm I, all right? Hohenzollern. Hohenzollern, of course, is his last name, his family creed. Now, he had utmost support from Bismarck, too. Bismarck did whatever he wanted to do. And one of the big initiatives that actually the Prussian monarch himself wanted to do at one point is look at what he's wearing. Military uniform. One of the biggest things that Wilhelm wanted to do is he wanted to modernize and increase the funding for his military. He wanted to make it better. And so Bismarck's like, okay, we can get that done for you, but we got to raise taxes. And Wilhelm's like, I'm fine with that. Go ahead and raise taxes. We're in a pretty wealthy country. We should be able to get this done. When Bismarck goes to the liberals to try and get this accomplished and try and prepare to raise taxes, he ends up getting a lot of feedback from them being like, hey, I don't know if we should do this. We don't really want to raise up another military. Remember in 1848, y'all used the military to crush the revolutions that happened. Well, Bismarck says, okay, well, we'll take that under advisement, but he just then goes, raises taxes, and collects them anyway, okay? Like, that is his support of Wilhelm, and they end up modernizing the army. That's an important thing to remember, okay? Remember, just before we get too far into the story, that he does go out and he modernizes the army. And so the third tactic that Bismarck is going to use to create Germany are known as his, write this down, wars of annexation. His wars of annexation. Okay, got it? What are they? His wars of annexation. Thank you. Now, Prussia is going to attempt to expand and annex or take control of other German states. Now, the thing about it is, how the heck are you going to accomplish this, Bismarck? How are you going to pull this off? Because if you start going to war with people that speak German, Austria is going to come down and crush you. And so is the rest of the Quadruple Alliance. If you try to go to war with anybody else randomly and you show your hand and people start thinking, oh, they're just trying to suck up all the other German states before Austria can get a hold of them, then the Quadruple Alliance is going to come together and they're going to stop you. So how do you do this? He did it with 3 wars, and they were geniusly placed. Now, again, a lot of historians argue like maybe he was just a good opportunist, but he did it with just 3 wars. So this right here, okay, like all this stuff right here, this is Prussia at first. All the green and the blue is what they're going to gain in 2 of these wars. And then in their 3rd war, the Franco-Prussian War, that yellow is what they gain, okay? So he used 3 wars to try and gobble up all this territory. But how is he going to do it, you ask? Well, let's go ahead and get into it. This series of wars, we're going to go through each of them quickly, okay? We're going to go through them pretty fast. But he's going to do some genius maneuvering. It's almost like the man was playing chess at all times, and he just knew exactly what to do. So the very, very first one was called the Second Schleswig, okay? So the Second Schleswig War. Okay, let's go ahead and say this together really quick. I'll throw the words up there, all right? You have two regions in Germany that were not controlled by a German-speaking state. Before Bismarck decided to go to war and gobble up all these other German states, these two areas were controlled by Denmark, all right? They were controlled by Denmark. That says the Kingdom of Denmark. Königreich means kingdom, and Danmark means Denmark in German, all right? So this area, the Danes owned Schleswig and Holstein. Okay, I'm going to say them again, okay? The Danish people owned Schleswig, Holstein. Schleswig, Holstein. Schleswig, Holstein. All right, so those are the two areas that the Danes controlled. And so what Bismarck decides to do is he's going to wage war on the Danes, but he's going to get Austria to come help him out. See, this is genius. You take the person that you want to keep off your back by making them think that you're one of their allies, right? So Austria and Prussia fight a war against Denmark, and it's a very quick war. It only took 9 months. Prussia and Austria are going to win because Denmark is just not prepared to fight a war against Wilhelm's new modernized army that Bismarck went out and collected the taxes for in the first place. So in 9 months, they beat Denmark. And what they decide to do is they're like, okay, this is what we'll do. Prussia will take control of Schleswig. Austria will take control of Holstein. Then what are they going to do? Psych! They're going to then turn and fight a war against Austria to gain control of Holstein, all right? Because now what's occurring is a lot of these other German states that are smaller, German states like Bavaria, and German states like Schleswig and Holstein, several of these other German states that are all over the place, Dusseldorf, they're all looking at Austria and Prussia, and they're like, well, if we unite with these guys, we'll be a much stronger people. They speak German, we should all be together. So Bismarck decides to push everyone's allegiance and be like, look, if you're going to pick somebody to go with, pick us, because we're stronger than the other guys. So he goes out and he fights a war against Austria. And they beat Austria in 2 months. 2 months, that's it. 2 months, bang. And again, why? Because of the new modernized Prussian military. Now look at this gun real quick. For those of you who don't think this is interesting, you can skip forward real quick. I don't really care, but I think this is amazing. For any of the other, any dads watching this right now, I think y'all might find this interesting, or anybody who's into military history, you'll really like this a lot. But this right here is the reason why the Prussians were able to keep winning all of these wars so quickly. This is one of the key modernizations that Wilhelm I made after Bismarck raised the taxes that he did in Germany without asking anybody's permission. This thing right here is a German invention. It's called the Dreise, D-R-E-Y-S-E, needle gun. This is the very, very first military-issued European model breech-loading bolt-action rifle that uses a firing pin, all right? Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, so a firing pin is a small little pin that is inside the trigger mechanism of the gun itself. When you pull the trigger, pin goes forward, it hits a small percussion cap or some type of percussionary device on the back end. It goes clink, boom, it explodes, sends the bullet out the front of the gun. Now, for the longest time, your percussion was made from a flintlock gun or musket, a front-loading musket, where you would pull that back, put a blasting cap on there, pull up, bang, let go. The hammer would come down, causing the ignition. Well, this is wildly different because muskets you had to load from the front of the gun, from the very, very front of it. You had to take a bullet pack out, pour that in, jam that down, take a wadding, put that in, jam that down, put the ramrod back on, click, bang. The best in the world could only get off 2 to 3 shots per minute, but not the Dreise needle gun on the other hand. The Dreise needle gun, instead of loading from the front end, now loaded to the barrel directly. So you see this bolt handle right here? On the Dreise needle gun, you would click, pull back the bolt, and the inside of the gun would be exposed. You then took the bullet pack out that was preloaded and prepped and ready to go, and you just slid it in right there, bolt forward, pull up, clow. Firing pin goes, sets it off. Now, a Prussian soldier, untrained, could let off 6 to 10 shots per minute, as opposed to an Austrian who could only let off 2. So in 2 months, they just wreck house. And then after they do this, they created this thing called the North German Confederation. Because all these other little states, like this one over here, which is home to Cologne, and like this one over here is home to Dusseldorf, and all these other different areas are going to join up with Prussia because they're like, it's obvious that Prussia is going to just keep taking over these different areas. We want to be with that German-speaking people. We want to be a part of this new Germany they're trying to create. So when this happens, they now rename their new area the North German Confederation. And the North German Confederation included the old Prussia, Brandenburg, and also some of these little semi-autonomous states at the time. Now, this one down here is the one they really wanted, though. Out of all the different provinces, out of all the different states, the one down here in the orange is the one they desperately wanted. And what it's called is Bavaria. Bavaria is home to a lot of money, okay? A lot of money. For example, there's this guy, this king that actually used to live there. His name was Ludwig II. And Ludwig II built this massive castle that I'm about to throw a picture of up real quick. And this castle is called the Neuschwanstein Castle. And this castle was actually the inspiration for the Cinderella Castle from Walt Disney. And so it's a very, very, very famous area in Germany. But the reason why they were having such a hard time getting them to come into their North German Confederation is mainly based off religion, okay? Bavaria is devoutly Catholic and has a lot of money. Prussia and the North German Confederation is very Protestant, mostly Lutheran. So Bavaria was like, I don't really know if we want to do this. We think we want to stay on our own because we don't want to be pushed to do something that we don't want to do. Well, Lao Tzu, the writer of The Art of War, a Chinese writer from, I don't even know, thousands of years ago, wrote a book, and in this book called The Art of War, he said a very famous quote. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And he could not have been more right. So here's the idea that Bismarck comes up with. How do I get Bavaria to believe that I'm on their side? Who are the people that border the Bavarians that all Germans pretty much uniformly hate ever since Napoleon? Oh, the French. So what Bismarck decides to do is he's going to engineer a war with France. And with his new modernized military and the weaponry that they have, they know it's going to be another quick war that they can easily win. And Bismarck has no desire to take territory in France. Well, except for this one little disputed territory called Alsace and Lorraine, but we're not getting into that right now. He has no desire, though, really to take a lot of land in France. He just wants to convince Bavaria that they are on the same side. So what he does is he uses mass market media to engineer the Franco-Prussian War. He has certain newspapers issue a doctored telegram that was sent from a Prussian ambassador to the French, basically saying that they might start a war, trying to encourage the French to start the war with them. And out of protection, he shows up with the German military to go and help and save Bavaria from what he also called in another interview where they were trying to convince the King of Luxembourg to be their ally instead of France's ally, these loudmouth, prone to violent behavior people, not as nice as they may pretend, right? So in the Franco-Prussian War, it only lasted 9 months, and France was being led by Napoleon III. And they were actually a pretty modern military, too. They were no slouch, but at this big battle called the Battle of the Sedan, actually Bismarck beats Napoleon III's forces, and they end up taking him hostage, and then the French, of course, are like, oh, we didn't like him anyway, and they have like another little baby revolution. Now, in the process of this whole thing, the Prussians then create a giant blockade all the way around Paris, and this little ruling entity inside of Paris is called the Paris Commune. And the Paris Commune was like, we refuse to surrender to the dirty Prussians. We don't want to have anything to do with that. So we're just going to hold out. And the Prussians were like, well, we'll just set up this giant blockade around your city, and eventually you'll starve and you'll give up. And here's a menu from the period of the Paris Commune when the Prussians were attacking. And as you can see, they did start running out of food because all the French people started turning to the zoo to find food to eat. This is a elephant dish that's inside of here. There is where's the other one? There's kangaroo right there. There's some rat flambe right there. Good stuff, you know what I mean? Gotta eat what you gotta eat. So yeah, the Parisians turned to, instead of wanting to just surrender to the Germans, they would rather eat elephant and kangaroo and all their zoo animals instead. But eventually they do run out of food, and they end up having to surrender to the German people, and the German Empire would be born after this. This is a title, though, by the way, if you were wondering. The birth of the German Empire occurs in the Palace of Versailles. Remember when we looked at pictures of the Palace of Versailles? The famous palace that was home to the Bourbon family and all the rulers? Well, this is its Hall of Mirrors, the area where Louis XIV, when he had it built, would have all of his parties. But ironically enough, when Germany became a country, it was declared in the ruling house of France. Now, I don't know if you can go ahead and tell, but this is going to set up a massive rivalry between France and Germany. And this is Kaiser Wilhelm I right here being declared the Kaiser or Emperor of all German people, and German people in the center, or of the German Empire itself. And in 1871, they officially became a country. And who's standing right here dressed all in white? Your boy, Otto von Bismarck, right? There he is. And so getting into it a little bit further, though, as you can see, Wilhelm took title of Kaiser or Emperor of the German states after winning the Franco-Prussian War. So the wars of annexation are a really big deal. It's the Second Schleswig War, Second Schleswig War, the Austro-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War. And those are just three wars to just keep gobbling up all these other little German states. Now, he establishes immediately after this a new German-based government that is going to unite under one language, one culture, one credo, one pride, one everything. And in this process, he's going to do a lot of stuff that's very, very famous in and of to himself. Bismarck decides to create some things to keep the liberals of Germany happy. And this is one of those big, big things. That right there is called the Reichstag building, or the ruling house. The Reichstag building is going to be the building that houses the legislative branch of Germany. And it still does today. It's located in Berlin. And this, of course, being their black eagle symbol that is going to symbolize the ruling authority of the Germans. It is their national symbol, is the black eagle. And that right there is Bismarck showing that he is ready to unite the German people based on their genius, based on their heritage and their culture and their love for all things schnitzel, all right? So, and all these other good stuff. Actually, schnitzel is delicious. If you ever get a chance to try it, it's good stuff. But this German empire that they have created is going to grow very, very strong in not a very long period of time. From 1871, when they become a country, they literally were ready to fight international wars by 1910. And I mean fight and win them, because they were very, very strong. Because here's the thing, what's the quickest way to grow the strength of your country? Well, it's to build up your industry, and also Germany is going to create something that the world had never seen. This thing called a welfare state. Now, the welfare state was to try and keep the socialists happy as well. So Germany is going to build up its industry, being led by their conservative government, Otto von Bismarck and Wilhelm, keeping the liberals happy with the Reichstag, creating a well-functioning welfare state and industry state for the socialists. Bismarck's a genius. Now, speaking of how much of a genius he is, let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? What I'm going to probably go ahead and tell you to do really fast is go ahead and hit pause on me for about 2 seconds, jot this list down so I can explain it fast so we don't have to take up too much of your time. All right, so this was possible only because Germany had, what I'm talking about is the growth and strength of the German Empire, the newly formed German Empire, was only truly possible because of the building up of the industry and the social welfare programs created under Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm I. Now, this is mainly possible, though, in the industry sector because Bismarck decided to have an educated workforce, right? So one of the coolest things that he did along with Kaiser Wilhelm I is he created a 9-year compulsory school system that actually existed inside of Germany, and it had 4 separate pathways, depending on how educated or intelligent the student was. And this would create opportunities for common German citizens to receive an education before they went into the workforce, and Wilhelm, the Hohenzollerns, and Bismarck felt that an educated workforce would work better stronger, more efficiently, and happier. And they weren't wrong. They also saw a huge amount of population growth. They built railroads all over the country as the world began to industrialize. As the rest of Europe began to industrialize, just like Britain had done in the very beginning of this unit, Germany catches up, and they catch up fast, too. They also become one of the world's biggest leaders in the production of steel. This over here is the Krupp Family Steel Organization, and it still exists today. Chemical engineering is going to be another big advent of the German Empire in the 1870s. Bayer is going to be a family firm that becomes a multinational firm during the German Empire era, and Bayer is still around. For any of your parents who might or may not be listening to this, I bet you right now they have Bayer aspirin in their medicine cabinet. The Bayer family creates pharmaceuticals, and they are just one example of a company that was created during this entire process. Some of the other big companies that are going to pop up during this time are ones that create dyes and other types of chemicals and other things like that, which is an absolutely super amazing advent of the Germans. And another big amazing advent is their single currency. They invented their own form of currency, the Deutsche Mark, right? And it's going to become their dollar. And so the Deutsche Mark is going to be a thing that unites them together. Now, speaking of the other genius that they were also imbibing too, when Bismarck created the Reichstag and that German-based government with a constitutional system and a Congress and things like that, he was appealing to the liberals, but now he knew that he had to appeal to the socialists as well. So in his social welfare programs, they created accident and sickness protection for workers, which was absolutely genius. Accident and sickness protection are two things that allowed German people who were injured or sick while working to receive government-funded benefits to keep them healthy, happy, and all around better off. And if they were to receive an accident on the job, they would be paid until their accident or their healing process was done. This is a huge step forward in social welfare programs for Europe. Also, unemployment benefits are going to be created, and these are things that are going to solidify the German economy and creating a working class that is more happy and ready to actually work. And then in this entire process, you got to understand one other thing. Bismarck wasn't perfect. As much as I like him, as much as a cool guy I think he is, he was unfortunately also a practicer of this thing known as negative integration. Now, when you integrate things, you are trying to bring them together or combine them. Now, here's the thing about Germany during 1871, or the German Empire in 1871. They're fresh on the street. They have just been created in, for the very first time, Germans have a country to call completely their own. In this process, you need to get them to break down their cultural walls and consider themselves as uniformly German. Because for hundreds of years, they considered themselves Bavarian, Sudeten, from Schleswig or Holstein or one of the other areas. They have considered themselves not necessarily German. They have considered themselves wherever they're from, because Germany never existed. So how do you get these people to look at one another and be like, oh, that man speaks German, he is German. He's not Bavarian, he's German. Well, you can do this in one of two ways. You can do positive integration, which is the practice of uniting people together collectively in a positive sense, or you can do this negatively, which is what Bismarck decided to do, which was not the best modality he could have picked. Now, the big one is he tried to unite the Germans against the Catholics at first. He was like, oh, well, most of us are Protestant and Lutheran, so maybe if we all turn on the Catholics, that'll unite a bunch of the Germans together against a common enemy. Well, the problem is the Protestants he was trying to unite together against these Catholics looked at Bismarck and they were like, man, dude, they're Christians just like us. We can't unite against them. So that actually failed and went really belly up on him. And then another big one was when he tried to outlaw socialism altogether. He tried to outlaw Social Democrats, a growing party inside the Reichstag, after not once, but twice someone tried to assassinate Wilhelm I, and both of the guys that tried to assassinate him appealed themselves as socialists, so they tried to outlaw social democrats altogether, which is just, ironically enough, make the socialists and socialism in Germany much stronger, because they went underground and started like creating newspapers and pamphlets and started doing much more like guerrilla style marketing and things like that, trying to get their ideas heard. Well, so that's negative integration. He tried to unite people against an enemy. Now, all in all, Bismarck wasn't perfect, but I'm telling you what, all in all, he was always better than this guy. This guy, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The biggest mistake was not of Bismarck. The biggest mistakes were made by this guy. I can't stand him. Where I say Bismarck is on my top 20 list of greatest historical figures I've ever talked about, Wilhelm II is definitely on my 20 of people I can't stand. I don't like him. He's a huge zealot. He has a dead arm, which is really, really strange. Like, he couldn't move his left arm. It just kind of sat and hung there all the time. And he also was, like, so devoutly all about making other countries in Europe look bad and making Germans look better. He, like, took negative integration to a whole new level. He fires Bismarck when he becomes Kaiser after the death of his father. He starts World War I, and I just think he's absolutely the all-around worst. So Kaiser Wilhelm II is where we will leave Germany. And speaking of second, peace. I'll talk to you guys later. Good job. I know this is a lot of information to take in about 40 minutes, but you got it. Don't worry. Y'all are going to crush this test coming up, and your extension assignment today is to do numbers 1 through 38 on your study guide. Do it on your own Google Doc. Make a copy of the Google Doc itself. The directions are in the Google Classroom. Make a copy. Put the answers in on your own. Send that bad boy on over to me, okay? I'll talk to you guys soon. Y'all are doing great. Keep it up. Auf Wiedersehen.